I'm gonna reroute the thermo drive.
Electronic mail failure.
Stored forever in a virtual library.
Computers can't swim.
They can now.
The data turbines, the website, it's alive.
Movies
And mainframes.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Movies and Mainframes, the podcast that is going to explore and discuss the representation of technology in media. I am your host, Andy, and today in the studio, I have a very special guest, someone who I'm very excited to talk with today. So let's go ahead and introduce him and welcome him, Sasha Giza. How you doing today, Sasha?
Very good. Hello there. As you could probably hear from my accent, I'm from Germany, but don't you worry, I came in peace, okay? So we talk a little bit about the movie, and let's quickly talk about me. I'm with SolarWinds for, I had full hair and less gray, like almost 10 years in various roles. Actually, a long time, right? And initially, my background is, network technician. I was a network technician around the year 2000 in a public school. Would you believe that? And I was hired to set up a network and also do some AD refresh. It wouldn't be a network job, but was part of it. But it turned out to be the worst part was teaching those teachers how to use this thing called internet. That was a nightmare. Well, long time ago.
Well, Sasha, I'm very excited to talk to you today because you picked a just bonkers movie, and I am so glad you did. Today, we are going to talk about 1995's Hackers. Yes, Hackers, directed by Ian Softly and starring Johnny Lee Miller, Angelina Jolie, Matthew Lillard, and, of course, one of my favorites, Fisher Stevens as the bad guy, the Plague. Let me read a quick synopsis here, and we will dive right into our notes. It says, a teenage hacker finds himself framed for the theft of millions of dollars from a major corporation. Master hacker Dade Murphy, a.k.a. Zero Cool, a.k.a. Crash Overdrive, that's Johnny Lee Miller, has been banned from touching a keyboard for 7 years after crashing over 1,500 Wall Street computers at the age of 11. Now, keen to get back in front of a monitor, he finds himself in more trouble than ever. So, Sasha, I have to ask you, so you were the one who chose to watch this movie to talk about today. I'm so glad you did, but why did you choose Hackers? What is your relationship with Hackers?
So I have a confession to make. Even though I'm in the perfect age, I did not watch the movie back in the 90s. Back in the 90s, I used the computer to play games. And, back in that time, you had to configure some weird files in DOS and later in early Windows, whatever. Also, I was not one of the cool guys. We will probably talk about the fashion in the movie. I was one of them. I was a metalhead, so I was wearing my leather jacket, whatever. And by that time, obviously, I hated the music in the movie, which is today one of the best parts of it, right? But there was one reference. So I'm a passionate gamer. There's this famous game called World of Warcraft. And a couple of years ago, in one of those expansions, there was like a quest, a mission, which you had to do, which was called Hacking the Gibson. I was like, what the hell? I knew Gibson as a guitar, okay, but nothing else. And you actually had to hack one of those computer thingies in the game, which has nothing to do with the movie. But that's where the reference came from. So I watched this movie maybe 10 years ago for the first time, like roundabout, plus minus. And it's so beyond crazy. So it's a movie that didn't age well at some point, but it's still something that is, it gets the feeling of that time, puts it in one box, and really is a nice summary of the 90s. It's interesting to say it that way. It's a cool movie, after all, a pretty cool movie.
Yeah, so I did see this. I didn't see it in the theater. It was one of the rare movies from this time period that I didn't see in the theater. So I would have watched this on probably like HBO around 97, 98. I remember watching it a couple of times, but I have not sat down and watched this movie since then. So it's been like 25 years since I've watched this movie, and I'm so glad we watched it, because I only remembered really like 2 parts of this movie and vaguely. So it was like watching it for the first time again. And this movie, I feel like, should be in the Library of Congress or some kind of time capsule, as far as like, this is what the 90s were or tried to be. Everything about this movie just screams 90s, from the camera, the way the camera works in this movie, the editing, especially the editing, but then you have the fashion, you have the soundtrack. This movie reminds me of, there was like this wave of mid 90s to late 90s, like tech movies, techno movies that kind of got away with more style than substance. Because really, this movie is not, it's not that great, but you just flow along with it because everybody's cool and everything's cool and the soundtrack's cool and the fashion's cool. But it reminds me of like other movies like The Saint, Johnny Mnemonic, Strange Days, where they all had these soundtracks that featured trance and house music. And like, I had so many soundtracks around this time that just featured, you know, Prodigy, Orbital, Moby, Left Field, Underworld, Massive Attack, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, goes on. But they just all are in this same vein of just like style over substance. But you forgive it because it's awesome, because there's so many Jenko jeans and parachute pants and tech vests and headgear, like people just have on goggles on their forehead for no reason, you know. They never use them throughout the film, but it's just an awesome time capsule for the 90s, and loved watching it.
Yes, like interesting that you mentioned Strange Days. This is also one of my favorites, and I occasionally watch that one around New Year's Eve, where the movie is recorded basically. And when you say the music, there's this live gig at the end of Strange Days. There's like FX Twin on stage in New York or somewhere, which is pretty cool.
Yeah.
So soundtracks are essential for movies of that time. And I think so, as you said, like the mid to late 90s, there wasn't much trouble. So the Cold War was gone and was before 9/11, etc. So it was kind of like a life free of too much trouble and fear and whatever. At least that's how I have the 90s in mind. Look, that is 25 years ago. Same for you, right?
Yeah,
but,
exactly.
It definitely was a different time. And yeah, I mean, the movie starts with this thingy about the kid who hacked computers and is not allowed to touch anything for a couple of years. There was this real life hacker at the same time or earlier, right? With that story, was it Mitnick or something? I don't remember the name.
Right.
Who was not allowed to touch computers for, I don't know, 10 years or whatever. It's a weird punishment, right? You're not touching a computer. But whatever, well, that's how it starts. And then we go with this nice Orbital song, I think, right? Where we transition into Mr. Miller sitting in the aircraft. Nice scene, like from one to one. Beautiful.
I love that he's looking outside the window of the airplane, and that the cityscape then turns into basically a motherboard. Everything turns into computer components. And honestly, it looks pretty cool. And there's all these visuals of being inside either cyberspace or inside of a computer. And while I was doing research, the director did not want to use CGI. He thought CGI at the time had this flat look. And I agree. I mean, unless you're doing Jurassic Park with $100 million budget.
Yeah.
CGI movies in the mid-90s, everything did kind of look flat. So they used traditional methods of like models, animation, and rotoscoping and everything. And some of that stuff actually looks pretty cool. And some of it looks pretty cheesy, but you know, it's the 90s, you forgive it. But yeah, so we're introduced to Dade Murphy, Zero Cool, aka Crash Overdrive. And he is now, so one thing I wanted to get, I wanted to check in with you because I felt like something was missing from this movie. So at 11 years old, he, or I'm assuming he's 11. At 11 years old, he's sentenced to, the $45,000 fine and 7 years probation. Cannot touch a computer or touch a phone, period. You're done. We catch up with him 7 years later. He's now living in New York with his mom. And immediately, he's using a computer. And we find out a little bit later in the movie, the FBI says that he violated his parole. And he even tells his mom, sarcastically joking, that she asks, "What are you doing?" Because she can obviously hear this click-clack of the keyboard. He says, "Oh, I'm just taking over a television station." And ha, 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 whatever, that's funny. But he's still on probation, and he's just got a computer that he's not even hiding. It's not like he pulled it out of some secret drawer. Like, it's just sitting on his desktop. So his mom is like, just doesn't care. She's like, "Oh, it's fine. You cost us this family, all this stuff. We had to move because of all the fines. But yeah, go ahead and use a computer." So I felt like that should have been more secret, or this should have been the first time he's getting back onto a computer, because he's not. Anyways, it was just really weird that they made a big deal of, and then everything with his family, and then like, "Oh, I'm just on a computer again."
Sounds to me as if you think that your parents didn't knew what you were doing back in the days.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Probably as a kid you can do a lot without anyone else knowing. But yeah, wasn't there as they arrived in New York, and he's already a grown up, they still had boxes around, so they didn't really unpack. So they moved recently, I think.
Yeah.
If I'm not
Agreed.
completely wrong, right? So yeah, he probably hooked up a computer and connected it, made it online like back in the days. And that was probably the crucial part where Mama should have been with the whip, like, "Stop it, stop it, stop it."
Yeah, and another part about his character that I felt like needed just a line. Like, it didn't need an in-depth explanation or anything. But if he is not supposed to use a computer for 7 years, and it's 1988 whenever he's on probation, and now it's 1995, whenever he shows up in New York and he meets up with this whole subculture of hackers, that Angelina Jolie and Matthew Lillard. Actually, let me read off their hacker names because they're just too good. So Johnny Lee Miller is Zero Cool / Crash Overdrive. He was Zero Cool when he was a kid. Now he's Crash Overdrive. Angelina Jolie, Kate, she's known as Acid Burn. Then we have Matthew Lillard, known as Serial Killer, cereal that you eat in the morning. And then Lawrence Mason, he is Lord Nikon. And then there's Phantom Freak. And then, of course, we have the bad guy, Fisher Stevens, as the Plague.
The Plague, yeah.
But whenever he meets up with this whole subculture, he's already a badass. Like, he knows what to do. There's no scene that says that, like, for instance, if there's no scene that shows, like, I've actually been doing computer stuff in secret this entire time. That's why I'm so badass. He has no line like that. And there's no scene with, like, Matthew Lillard or somebody saying, like, "Oh, what are you trying to do? That's so old school. Nobody's done that in years. This is how we do that now." To show, like, oh, I need to now, do this new method because now it's 7 years later and I haven't touched a computer in a while. So I like it that he just comes in and he's already badass, the top hacker of this, group.
Actually, I like the idea which you have there. So he managed to keep up to date with tech without doing something for 7 years. That is like an amazing ability, and I would like to be able to do the same. So and stay up to date without doing anything.
One thing I will say about this movie, it's called Hackers, and they deliver on the title. There is a lot of hacking done in this movie. It's not just like two key scenes. They're just hacking everything. And one of the first hacks they do is whenever I was talking about Crash Overdrive, and he says, "Mom, I'm just taking over a TV station." So this is a great little scene, and it's one of the, at least half of it is one of the more realistic scenes as far as hacking goes. So there's this like Rush Limbaugh type person on the television. He wants to take it off and change the programming. So he calls the TV station, and he is talking to a security guard there, and he's posing as a employee that has this big problem, and he needs the security guard's help. Otherwise, his ass is on the line, and you got to help me, buddy. And he ends up getting that security guard to read him the telephone number to the modem so he can call directly into the station and tap into their system. Great use of social engineering. It's still way hacks are carried out today. And so that's very real. What follows is absolutely ridiculous. And whenever this scene played out, that's when I was like, oh, okay, this movie is more about style and the feeling that I'm just going to let all of this wash over me, and I'm not going to worry so much about the realism of this movie, because he taps into the automation for this TV station, which is a very real thing. Back in the day, you had these arms that were on tracks, and they would pull out a VTR tape. They would pull out a tape, and then they put them in these VTRs, and then depending on your scheduling, you had multiple VTRs, and they'd have pre-rolls, and then at the right time they would play. If it was truly automated, the automation would play it. Otherwise, you'd have a person in master control at the TV station playing it and then taking the source. So the automation, he has it eject the tape and put in a new tape. Fine, that's cool. Sure, that works. But then we find out acid burn is also in the system, and they have a mechanical arm duel where these mechanical arms are grabbing the tape from each other, and like, ha ha ha, it's really silly and funny and just completely implausible. These things are on rails, literally, where if you tell it to grab a tape, it goes to the predestined spot, pre-programmed spot. You can't tell it, hey, grab that thing that's 5 inches in front of you. It's silly. But it just shows you that these two are good at what they do. Yeah.
Did you notice this small little detail when he rang the dude who was already working there? Like, I'm Eddie Vedder from accounting or whatever. So he introduced himself as Eddie Vedder. Like, Interesting.
Yeah. In that phone call, he says he's Eddie Vedder from accounting, that he needs his help because his BLT drive.
Oh, yes.
Which made me crack up. He also says a couple of other things that are ridiculous just to sound important and cool. Yeah. And then he says that he has a presentation from Mr. Kawasaki.
Yeah, I mean, it is actually. So as I watched it the other day, it was really like vintage social engineering, but this is exactly how it works today. So you throw around some technical terms to make the person on the other line uncomfortable. You create a sense of urgency, like, I need help now. And that's sooner or later where people just agree and give you whatever information they've asked for. In this case, the direct dial of the modem. Oh my God! So we moved on in technology, but the principle of what he did there is really realistic and still in use. Today is probably someone who is apparently someone we work together with, reaching out to us on LinkedIn, whatever, and asking for stupid stuff like, are you still with that customer, whatever, right? So we see those things happening every day.
Eventually, we're introduced to the bad guy of this piece. It's the character actor Fisher Stevens. He plays the Plague. I always like watching Fisher Stevens. He's usually ridiculous and over the top, especially in this movie, but it's so much fun to watch him. And his introduction, every time he's on screen, he just cracks me up. And I don't think it's supposed to be intentional, or maybe it is. But like the very first time we are introduced to him, he's on a skateboard coming into some huge meeting. And that's how cool this guy is. He's their chief, I forgot his actual title, but he's basically
chief security officer or whatever.
Exactly. And he just comes into that meeting on a skateboard and wearing like some fur-lined trench. It's great. The whole thrust of this movie is that he is, with the help of Lorraine Bracco, which I do not remember her being in this movie, but it's always good to see Lorraine Bracco. They have a scheme that they are going to embezzle money. They are going to steal money from the company that they work for, which is Ellingen Mineral Company, and that the CEO of Ellingen Mineral Company is named Duke. So this guy's name is Duke Ellingen. That made me laugh because there's a couple of name drops in here that are just like on purpose. There's later we'll talk about it in depth. The Gibson computer, obviously named for William Gibson. Later, Fisher Stevens, the plague, has to go incognito, and he changes his name to Babbage, which is obviously a reference to Charles Babbage, the polymath. And
I think the name dropping is actually quite cool if you consider it is mid-90s, and back in the days we didn't have the resources we have today. We hear a funny name in a movie, we can just Google out of it, like, who is this? And back in the days, no one knew. So I guess the few people who might have heard such a name back in the 90s, they're like, oh, wow, this is so cool. This is so cool. Smart move. Smart move.
Yeah. So Plague and Lorraine Bracco, they are going to steal money from the company. And the way they do that is basically Superman 3, but just a little different. So they are going to infect the company's financial area. You know, they're going to infect the company with a worm/virus that he created. And what this virus does is that every financial transaction that this company said, they say from like $10 to $10 million, it is going, this program is going to reserve a few cents off each transaction. It's just going to earmark it. It's not going to do anything with it yet. But then over time, with this virus sitting in their system, once it accumulates $25 million, once it hits the target goal that they set, then it's going to take all of that change that is earmarked from the millions of transactions, slap it into their secret bank account, erase all records that had ever existed, and then hooray, that's the plan. Well, this hacker group has stumbled onto the plan, and now the plague has to stop them by setting up one of their own to take the fall, and basically everybody's being watched. Whenever Joey, who ends up taking the fall for this, he's breaking into this institution. He's getting into the Gibson computer that everybody keeps talking about. Matthew Lillard early on in the movie says like, oh man, I'd love to get my hands on one of those Gibson systems. It's supposed to be this unhackable, awesome, just tech of the future. And whenever we are finally introduced to the Gibson system, man, it does not disappoint. It's this huge room, and Penn Jillette from Penn and Teller is manning the station. He is at the helm of this Gibson computer, but I don't even know how to describe it. You have to see it. The keyboard is this ginormous control panel that has glowing orange buttons that are not labeled. Uh-huh. And then in front of them are huge glass panes that have either the information projected onto them or they're glass LED panels. And then all around them are these glass LED towers that are supposed to look like servers and everything. It's just gorgeous glass and neon and everything. It's like, I would love it if my workstation looked like that. And so
I'm not sure if you were like, it is nice to look at, but is it nice to work with? Just imagine this other movie with Tom Cruise a couple of years later where he made these big hand movements to control.
Oh, Minority Report, yeah.
Yes, stuff like that looks nice, but I would get ached with my muscles after half an hour sitting there. And the server room or whatever we want to call it in the hackers, it is so insane.
Yes.
Like you need to have a lot of fantasy to build something like that.
Oh, I know. Just crazy. Like if this was an actual practical place, just the lighting budget for this place would be ridiculous. Yeah. So Joey is getting into the system. Penn Jillette gets an alert, and this made me laugh. Penn Jillette sees that there's some unusual activity happening. He ends up calling the plague to say, hey, there's only one user, but he's doing the work, or whatever he says. Of 10 users, I think we have a hacker. And so the plague comes down. He comes rolling into that place on a skateboard, of course.
So amazing.
But it made me laugh because the plague, he's talking down to this guy over the phone. He even calls him a techno weenie, which love that insult. Need to remember that, techno weenie. But it made me crack up because they obviously have alerts to unusual activity, but yet he doesn't get those alerts pushed to him directly. He gets it pushed to someone that he feels is inferior and dumb, and he's relying on him to make the phone call. So I just like it that he's this master tech guy, wants to know everything. He's the best at everything, but he still uses this dumb middleman, according to him. Even though, he can push those alerts. They have the internet. That he has a phone. I'm sure he has the coolest pager ever.
Yeah.
So
these two scenes. First, we see the man cave of the plague. It looks so amazing.
Yes.
If you pause for a moment, it's like, wow, like everyone's dream back in the days, and it still looks cool. We see some more tech of that studio in a later scene. And he's like under his blanket, as if he's like hungover from last night's party, grabbing the phone, like, what is it, right? And the next scene is so crazy. They are in this server room. The door opens and dude is coming with his skateboard into the server room. Whoa, fascinating. Probably violating 15,000 different work security laws today, but it looks amazing and impressive. Everyone's dream, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah. Speaking of his man cave, there's a part of the movie where the plague is playing a virtual reality game. He's got on the visor goggles. He's got in one hand, basically whatever you want to call it, the joystick, the remote control, and the other hand is completely empty. It's free. Does not have any kind of accessory. And so whenever someone comes into his apartment, he's playing this game. He's distracted, doesn't know somebody's with him. One thing that made me laugh is he's playing this obviously like action game, and with the hand that has no device connected to it or any kind of accessory, he's punching over and over. So that would be doing nothing in that game, especially in the 90s. Also, if you were looking at him, the plague loves costumes. So in this scene, he is wearing a cowboy fringe leather vest with a sheriff badge, and he has a toy gun tucked in his waistband. So I don't know if he's playing a Western game or whatever, but he wants to be in character. And then later in the movie, whenever he has to go on the run and we see him on the airplane, he's dressed as an old man, as this Babbage guy, and he has on a gray wig, like Hollywood prosthetics of a gray wig and gray beard. It looks amazing. And I just have to think, like, the plague loves costumes, and he must have just some closet filled with costumes and fake wigs and tchotchkes and all this stuff. And it just made me crack up that 2 times in the movie he's playing dress up. It just made me laugh.
But there's one thing which I just remembered. I mentioned earlier I never watched the movie back in the days, but I was obviously active in the internet, and I used AOL back in the day, so so long ago. And so many folks called themselves Zero Cool. And it had absolutely no meaning to me because I didn't watch the movie back in the day. It's like, why is there Zero Cool 2? Why is there Zero Cool 666? What's wrong with these people? It took me 10 or 15 years to discover the secret.
There's this part in the movie that I want to talk about because I think it shows how far we've come. There's Wendell Pierce, who plays this FBI guy, and he's talking with Mark Anthony. Mark Anthony's in this movie. I didn't even know he was an actual actor besides like playing some band leader in a movie. But I look him up and I was like, oh, he's got a whole acting career. Crazy. So anyways, Mark Anthony's in this movie, and they're talking, and Mark Anthony tells Wendell Pierce, Gil, the FBI guy, that, sir, we recovered uncorrupted hard drives. Okay, great. But Wendell Pierce, this being 1995, he says, like, I worked for the president for so many years, I don't know anything about computers, speak English. Like, what does that mean? And it made me laugh because, and he has to tell him that, oh, sir, it just means that all the files that were on his computer, we were able to get them. They're still there. And he's like, oh, that's great news. And all he said was uncorrupted hard drives. And I don't think there's anyone alive right now that if you said uncorrupted hard drives, that would be super confused. I think we'd all get it. I mean, unless you were an octogenarian or something, maybe. But I think you could tell any 30 or 40-year-old nowadays, like, uncorrupted hard drives, and they'd be like, oh, cool, great, sounds good. And I was just like, hey, man, how far we've come.
Girlfriend later.
Say what? Yes.
Let me test this theory with my girlfriend later.
So the plague hides his virus, this Superman 3 virus, in the garbage file. Sounds
Correct.
good.
Well,
Yeah.
no, it's running on the system and then probably automatically put into garbage. It's like an old school Unix system, right? So it runs a little
Right.
different. And the hacker dude, who I think he doesn't really have a crew name, a hacker name, right? The guy who did the first attempt on the
Yes, all he's known as Joey. He's trying to come up with a cool name, and nothing's taking. They're all duds. But yes, Joey.
Just Joey. Embarrassing if you're just Joey. Anyway, so he manages to get into the system, right? So everyone is like, yes, totally, I'm hackable, and I wish I could just go there inside. And he, the other dude who doesn't really have a name, so yeah, here I click a few buttons, zip, 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 okay, I'm inside. What will I do on a garbage file? Let's see what stuff we find there. And well, he actually finds this, what's the name of this, incriminating material in the file.
The Da Vinci virus.
Yeah, keeps a record of it. Actually, there's a funny scene. He's like downloading the file, and in those movies, you see how the download like 1%, 2%, 3%. Usually, in such movies, there's a noise like, I don't remember if it's here. Anyway, it takes ages to download. And his mom comes to in his bedroom like, why are you still up? What's wrong here? And she plugs the power cable or something right off the computer.
Yeah.
And you really see the download turns gray on the screen. This is so ridiculous. But yeah, it's fun.
There's a scene about in the middle of the movie where Acid Burn learns that Johnny Lee Miller is Crash Overdrive, that they were the ones who were dueling at the television station Automation. But also in that scene, wherever they're dueling, she not only is hacked into the television station, she's hacked into his computer, because she's sending him visuals of, I forgot all the screens, but just like, who are you? I'm going to expunge you, all this stuff. And eventually at the end of that scene, she shuts him down. And he's like, oh my God, wow. And then later in the movie, she finds out, oh, that was you? Well, you were in his computer. You had all his information. You could have known that it was Johnny Lee Miller the whole time. So anyways, whatever, gonna forget it. But Johnny Lee Miller sees that she has this, state-of-the-art, brand new laptop. It's just sitting on a desk. He has to go look at it. But this movie has so much misogyny in it, where there's so many scenes of like, just because she's a girl, like, oh, do you know how to use this thing? Blah, blah, blah. And every time she has to say, like, just fuck off, dude.
Isn't this too much machine for you?
Exactly. It's an Apple PowerBook Duo 280. That's what this is. And it has, according to Johnny Lee Miller, as he's reading off the spec, it has a P6 chipset and a PCI bus. And I that's gobbledygook to me. That's all a BLT. He might as well have said BLT drive to me. But I look it up, and the P6 is faster than the Pentium that they talked about, where he says it's 3 times faster than the Pentium. Wow. And then a PCI bus, and then this P6, I looked it up, it runs 133 megahertz. And again, how far we've come, that is super impressive. And it's also single core, I'm assuming. And that's it. We're talking about things in the gigahertz and multiple cores and everything like that. But I just love
PCI is still a thing. So back in the days, the predecessor was ISA or something. It was a massive thing if you looked at the motherboards back in the days. Mm-hmm. And PCI was a little bit newer. I think for GPUs, for graphic cards, we used a different bus a little bit later. PCI is still there, just it had a few revisions. It's now PCI 5 or whatever on a machine. So brand new back in 1995, but still a thing today.
Yes, and she ends up at the end of that conversation talking about RISC architecture, RISC, and that she says it's going to change everything. And again, that means nothing to me. And I look it up. I have to look up what RISC is. As is canon on this podcast, I know nothing about technology. I'm a movie guy. That's why I have you on. But the RISC architecture, according to the articles I read, she was basically right. Like that's what became commonplace. Do you have any background in that? Speak on that.
A long time ago, right? So what I have in mind is those were CPUs made for a specific purpose, and they were able to run that specific task much faster than like a general purpose Pentium or whatever, right?
Gotcha.
So more like niche products, but they were impressive for what they did. And I think later on this became power PCs, which Apple used in the early 2000s before they moved back to Intel, because Intel was the system that was more successful. Interesting that Apple changed again now, but that's a completely different story and probably not something for today.
I did appreciate that anytime you see them on a laptop in the wild, which, by the way, some of these laptops are wild. Like just the screens on them, they're huge.
Off a finger.
Yeah, they're just so tiny, but they're still housed in these huge plastic frames and everything. They're crazy. But I did appreciate anytime you see these laptops in the wild and they're doing stuff, they are connected to phone booths or communication towers. They at least knew, like, this is how it's done and this is how we have to show it being done. There's no crazy, there's nothing crazy. They are just tapped into these phone booths and everybody's sitting around, standing guard, looking out. I did appreciate that. In this movie, a couple of times they talk about using tones to bypass, to get free long distance or things like that. Did you ever play around with that as a kid?
No, I did some other things which I better not talk about, but I didn't do this. Actually, I'm not even sure if this would have been possible in Germany back in the days, because I don't know if the telephone system was the same. But yeah, this phoning thingy was much of a stuff, and there's multiple movies that show details about this. Yeah,
War Games was the first time I ever saw it featured in a movie.
Yes.
So this Da Vinci virus, that's the one that's the plague created. There's a representation of the Vitruvian Man on the Da Vinci virus, this Adonis model-like figure. And he actually speaks, where it's just like, you will give me $5 million, whatever. He speaks, and it's obviously a video file that has just been edited and made to look a little weird. I'm guessing we're supposed to think that is supposed to be computer-generated imagery, because later, whenever they hack into the Gibson and they're changing the Da Vinci virus, they've actually altered this video of this Vitruvian Man to say what they want to say now. And I was like, so unless that guy had a recording session and said those things for you, it doesn't work that way. But made me crack up because it was like, that's when I realized, like, oh, that's supposed to be a computer generated image. It's supposed to be CGI, not just an actual video file of somebody.
Then took us 1 or 2 more decades to go to where they were in this movie, right? So we could do it today, but not back in the days. No. Actually, I think when they started using this high-end machine in Acid Burn's home for the first time, they had some fancy visuals. Everything looked crazy and was flying around him. I remembered like one of the worst CGI movies, Lawnmower Man or whatever that was called.
Yes.
I had like memories on that. That was so stupid.
Which, by the way, we will be covering this season on Movies and Mainframes. So stay tuned. Yes. Speaking about those visuals. So the first time that someone goes into the computer. So in the Matrix, everybody sees the code. Everybody sees the green code cascading. That's the computer. That's the vision of the computer, whatever. In this movie, it is flying equations. Anytime somebody goes into the computer, they're hacking. And I still cannot tell, is this just what they see in their head? Or is it actually like happening? Because they hack into multiple systems and they show the same thing over and over with these flying equations and these weird like amoeba mitochondrial background screensaver things with just equations flying all the way over. And it's very strange, but I love it.
But now, as you mentioned, if this is something what they see, I think particularly in the earlier part of the movie, Zero Cool sees things for like half a second. Like, what did he do? Slapping Angelina Jolie or something, which he wanted to do in this moment? It's just an element of storytelling which they brought into this movie.
Which I thought was really cool when they first introduced it. Yes, what you're describing is that when Johnny Lee Miller has a thought, instead of saying it out loud, the editors and the directors let us in on his thought process by using pop culture, like 15 frame clips from movies and television shows and newscasts. They're just like these quick montages. It's like, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, if anybody's old enough, it's like that HBO show Dream On with Brian Benben. Anytime he had a thought, you would see some clip from a movie or TV show that was telling the audience what his thought process was. So they do the same thing in this movie. And I thought it was cool for a second because I was like, oh, he's an 11-year-old kid who can't use a computer anymore. If I couldn't use a computer anymore, I would just watch TV nonstop. I mean, I like reading, but come on. I would be just watching TV nonstop. So I thought this was going to explain or talk about where he's been for the past 7 years, just consuming media. So this is how he thinks now. He doesn't even think in computer terms.
Start living in a fantasy world in such a situation. And that is kind of what we see there as a visual effect.
By the end of the movie, everybody has to stop the plague, his plan, and they all have to get into the Gibson. It's the climax of the movie. They meet these, what were their names? I have them written down. The people from the TV, the two dudes from the TV show, brought to you by Jolt Cola. They have a TV show called Hack the Planet, brought to you by Jolt Cola. Jolt Cola. So it's just another 90s thing.
Or something.
Yes, Blade and, yeah, you're right. So they go to them for help and they say, well, you are going to have to raise a digital army and you are to stop this. So that's what they do. They do it in the course of a couple of hours, reach out. Everybody's going to help to bog down and get into this Gibson machine so they can stop the plan. That's all I know. And this scene plays out hilarious and beautifully, where they're throwing different hacking programs at each other to stop at one point. The plague tells Penn to unleash the cookie monster. And he says, and he's like, how do I do that? And he goes, you just type in, yeah, you just type in cookie. And then we see this Pac-Man-like cookie monster, like, eat stuff up. Then there's a rabbit virus that is replicating. And not only is it just replicating, there is an actual icon of a rabbit on the screen, doink, 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 jumping around and replicating. And the whole time, Lorraine Bracco is there. She has no business being in this room. She knows nothing about computers, and she's just distracting everybody. But she's there for the audience where, like, Penn says they're doing a kernel attack or something like that. And she says, Colonel who? And he's like, no, Colonel Bob, and explains what a kernel is. And throughout the entire scene, that's all she's doing is like, what a worm, what a virus, brain cancer, oh no. You know, it's great writing. It's really funny and just over the top and ridiculous, but I love it.
We forgot to discuss a quite memorable scene. So earlier what happens is that the plague is kind of like blackmailing Zero Cool, who has this disc with the content from the garbage file. Like, and if you don't give it back to me, I will change your mother's criminal record, blah, 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 blah.
Yes.
So there's a scene where he gives him that physical disc and they meet in some dark alley. John Lee Miller stands around. It's super dark. It reminds me on Gotham.
Yes,
you know,
exactly.
the Batman world. And this limousine comes slowly towards him. And at the back of the limousine, someone is on a skateboard, his hand on the car. The car is basically driving him. And while passing John Lee Miller with the skateboard, he's grabbing the disc. He disappears into the darkness, and there's some smoke coming from the ground. So either Gotham or The Claw, one of my favorite movies. It had this feeling of The Claw, you know, the darkness and blah blah blah.
Oh yes.
But it's so stupid. And the plague actor, he looked like he's going to fall off the skateboard in any second. I don't know.
Oh my God.
So crazy.
Watch that scene if you're listening to this again, because they cut to a close-up of his face and he looks so uncomfortable. Like, oh my God, I'm about to just eat shit. But so I have to ask you, I want to know your opinion in this scene with the plague, and just honestly with any scene in the plague. Do you think we are supposed to take him seriously, or is he actually a comical villain? Because I honestly cannot tell if they're trying to, because everything is so crazy because it's the 90s and the costumes, like we talked about, costumes, hairstyles, everything is already so outlandish. But do you think this movie is supposed to say this dude's a bad dude and he knows what's up? Look, he's on a skateboard. He's cool. Or is this played for comic effect? What do you think?
I think they were serious back in the days. It's just now, 25 years later, almost 30 years. Oh, wow. That it is, I don't know. It's just funny because it's so stupid. But
I know. But man, I'm so glad you brought that up, because when that scene, that was the only laugh out loud moment for me in this whole movie. The minute they just show him Back to the Future 2 style, just hanging onto the back of that limo instead of being in a limo, which I think would be more cool if you just pulled up and rolled down the window and took it and be like, later,
here it
later,
is.
Zero Cool. But no, he's just hanging on and just skateboarding and doesn't even say a word, just grabs it and goes off into the steam of the night. So ridiculous. So at the end of the movie, they've successfully stopped the Gibson. They've extracted the virus, so they now have a copy and can prove that the Plague and Lorraine Bracco were working together to embezzle the company. Joey's innocent. All the hackers are innocent. We're just trying to do good. And movie quickly wraps up, and everybody gets their comeuppance. Everybody gets arrested who needs to be arrested, everybody gets a happy ending, especially Crash and Burn. They are on a rooftop pool, and he says, "Hey, look what I did for you, babe." And she looks out, and he's quote unquote hacked the lights of 3 office buildings to blink on and off to say Crash and Burn. No. Like
Come on, he's such a
would be
romantic.
easier to just break into those places and turn on the proper light. I don't know of any system that could just control individual office lights. Pretty sure they'd just be on a grid of, yeah, I'm just turning off the northeastern wing of floor 5 or on. And, but yes, of course, we have to have it. And then camera pans up and the cityscape once again turns into the computer. They live in the computer. Their love is in the computer. And what a just crazy movie this is. Like I said, for me, people, I would recommend watching this movie. Well, actually, before I get into that, Sasha, I had an interesting note when I was doing research for this movie. The movie had like any movie, a promotional website pretty early, 1995. So, hey, they were on board early, and they should be. The movie's called Hackers. It was later hacked by a group calling themselves the Internet Liberation Front. And all they did was the cast member photos, they doodled on them and made them say silly things. And they changed the text that was on the website where it originally said, "This is going to be an entertaining, fun promotional site for a movie." They changed it to, "This is going to be a lame, cheesy promotional site for a movie." And then the studio execs decided to leave it up. They're like, "Hey, it's perfect." But I feel a little too perfect.
Fake promotion?
Yeah, it's all fake promotion. I mean, if you're actually going to crack a website and, do some graffiti or damage, the fact that they did 5th grade style doodles on people and only said, "This is going to be a lame, cheesy promotional site," I call bullshit. Like, there's no way. They would have done so much more damage. They would have done things a little bit more explicitly. So I'm onto your game. I know what you're doing. You can't fool anybody. Sasha, once again, thank you so much for choosing this movie. I actually probably will revisit it every once in a while, because for me, I would recommend watching this movie. And I wouldn't really honestly recommend it for the actual like content of the movie so much, like the storyline, because the story is pretty basic. We've all seen this type of story before in other heist movies and other, whatever. But like I said, this movie is just the perfect time capsule of the 90s. While I was watching it, I just got this wave of nostalgia, and not from of the movie, of just all the things featured in the movie. And it just brought me to this place where, I mean, the mid to late 90s, the perfect time for me, where I'm not a kid anymore, but yet I'm not an adult that has all these adult responsibilities. So it does have the feeling of this movie of carefree fun. I can do whatever I want. I don't have parents checking up on me constantly. But the hairstyles, the music, the costumes, the editing, everything, the lingo that people use, it's so much fun to watch. And I probably will watch it. My wife saw me watching it while I was taking notes, and she was like, "Oh, I love this movie." So she's jealous. So Sasha, now watching it again after quite a while, what's your take on it? Do you recommend this movie? Should people watch it? Is it silly? What is your end thoughts?
Well, it's not a masterpiece, definitely not. But it's also not a waste of time. It's a funny movie. It gets funny the older it gets, I think. But overall, it is more fiction than science. Even when we talk about technological topics over there, I'm pretty sure they had like a dude who advised them on stuff. to bring some reality into it. But then again, it's mid-90s, and those computers were still a mystery to most of us. So it was so easy to bullshit us in any way, right? And we asked for it. So it's perfectly fine. But no, it doesn't have the reality of some other movies or TV shows, which probably came a little bit later, and we had the better understanding of technology. We still do have a better understanding of technology, how it works, and we don't need all this visualizations anymore, which they just used as part of storytelling back in the days.
Visualizations in these movies are just wild.
Yeah.
I mean, and you would just have to think that you've used a computer before. I mean, one, you're editing this, unless you're doing it old school style, you're editing on a computer. The person who's making these visual graphics is most definitely using a computer. So it's just always funny what they end up on, because they have never seen anything like this in their life, but then they're trying to pass it off as, oh no, this is what it looks like when you open a file or whenever you bypass somebody's security. Of course, there's huge skull and crossbones and, jail bars and everything like that. It's like, no, usually it's just a pop-up box that says error or access denied. That's usually about it. I don't have, because one of the things that they do in this movie that I just have to think like, what are you doing? Is they'll show people constantly typing on their keyboard, but then the visual of the computer shows them flying through the information, to get to the proper subdirectories, virtual server, or, whatever they're supposed to represent these subdirectories until they find the garbage file or find whatever they're looking for. And all I can think about is like, what are you typing? Are you literally typing the flying? Like, now go left a little bit, now go right, now go up. It's just funny that you've used a computer. You know how this stuff works. One, they don't beep and boop at you constantly, because if they did, you would throw it out the window after 15 minutes if you couldn't shut it off. And then there's no program in the world where I double click on a file and equations come out at me, and then I'm flying all of a sudden, and then, oh, there's my Word document. Thank you.
Yeah, 5 minutes later. Who had that much time?
Exactly. One little last note I have to say before we go, because it made me chuckle while writing it. And so for pre-production of this movie, and I think this just sums up this movie for me perfectly, is that for pre-production of this movie, the cast spent 3 weeks together, hanging out, getting to know each other, getting to become friends. But also, they took typing classes, and they all learned how to rollerblade together.
Oh, yes. That was important in the 90s. Yeah.
Very important. It was so important that club/rave place that they always went to had rollerblade ramps. Like, that's how important rollerblading was. Like, screw the American Disabilities Act. That's not why you have ramps. We have ramps because we have to rollerblade everywhere. That's how important it was. All right, Sasha. Well, thank you so much for being my guest today. I had a lot of fun talking to you. And thank you to the listeners. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Wherever you are listening, please rate and subscribe us. It helps us. Also, I want to hear from you. I want to hear, did we miss something that you think deserves further discussion? Is there a movie in the future that you want to know? There's 2 ways to contact us. You can go to thwack.com, where this podcast lives. Find the episode, leave a comment. You can leave generic comments on any episode. Trust me, I will see it. Also, you can email us at moviesandmainframes@solarwinds.com. Never forget, hack the planet. And we are going to log off until next time. We'll catch you later. Bye.
Crash and burn, and auf Wiedersehen.
Movies and Mainframes.